Hey everybody, how are you today? It's Mrs. Snook. So in today's lecture, I'm going to continue talking about the Second Industrial Revolution, or the Gilded Age, which remember is this period of intense economic development which starts really in about the 1870s and goes to 1905. It got that nickname because of that book by Mark Twain. And we're going to continue to talk about some of the major inventions and developments during the Gilded Age. And today we're going to be specifically focusing on some of these industrialists, trying to determine, are they captains of industry or are they robber barons? So remember, as we're going through the Second Industrial Revolution, you should be kind of comparing it in your mind to that First Industrial Revolution and realizing that, it is different. It occurs 100 years later. It's powered by electricity. We see, the light bulb, we see the telephone as major inventions. And of course, there's new changes in technology in terms of transportation, and people are using the elevated train, the subway. They're going to start to use the automobile, and they're, of course, going to be more reliant on trains than ever before. Now, trains is where I left off in yesterday's lecture, and I was talking about how trains really change America. Because in 1869, they create the Transcontinental Railroad, so people can travel across the country. It leads to the creation of new towns. It's easier for people to become farmers and miners or cowboys as they ship their cattle. And honestly, railroads become America's first big business. And what I mean by that is that railroads are America's first true corporations. So we're going to talk a little bit about economics, or about how people make money. And you have to understand that if one person creates a business, that's called a sole proprietorship. So I'll take lemonade, for example. That seems very easy to understand. If you want to have your own little lemonade stand outside your house, and you're doing all the work and squeezing all the lemons and, producing your lemonade and, ringing people up once they buy a cup of it and charging $1 for it, that's a sole proprietorship. It's a little business. But all of a sudden, if you start to get a line of customers and people love your lemonade and say it's extra delicious and, oh, it's charged just the perfect amount, you may take on a partner. And that partner may help you do the work. They may help you by giving you money to buy more lemons and more sugar. And so they become your partner, and it's a partnership. If the business continues to grow even more, it may become what's considered a corporation. And when it comes to a corporation is a company that's gotten so big that now it's offering stock or ownership of the company to the public. And so for, $5, $10, $25, $50, you could buy ownership or basically control in a company. Now, you don't really get to tell them what to do, so to speak. It's more so that you give them their money, and they take your money to expand, to grow, to, if it was a lemonade stand, to buy more lemons, to make more stands, to advertise. And if the company does well, if people say this lemonade is the best in the nation and it's charged, people are paying the right amount for it. You're charging the right amount, I should say. The product is it's just messed up the way I said that. But if the stock is going up because they're making profits and Americans love it, you're going to be a happy stock owner. If eventually it goes up and up and up, you might choose to eventually sell it and you'll make a big profit. If the company tanks because it's discovered, that the lemonade causes cancer, then yeah, they're probably going to go out of business and you're going to be desperate to sell your stock to anyone for any price whatsoever before it goes totally under. So the first examples of corporations in America where they're offering stock are in the railroad industry. And so we're going to talk at first today about some of these railroad tycoons that you were reading about for homework and trying to decide, are these men captains of industry? Or are these men robber barons? Do they have qualities of heroes or don't they? And I want you to take a look at the map here and notice that in the 1830s, we didn't have a lot of railroads in America. They started to build more in the 1840s and then in the 1850s. But you have to remember, these are private companies which are doing this. And so it was very chaotic. The railroad lines don't connect. You can't necessarily go from one city to the state that you want to. You would have to board one train and then disembark and get another train. And the railroad trains, they used different size gauges, and it was very difficult and problematic to travel. Now, by the time we get to the 1860s, right as the Civil War is breaking out, you're hopefully still noticing that, yes, the amount of railroad tracks in America has increased dramatically, but still primarily in the New England area, throughout New York, into Chicago. In the South, It really just depends. I mean, we have entire areas. Now, granted, there's the Appalachian Mountains there, but we have entire areas where there's, through the Appalachians and the Smoky Mountains, there's no railroad tracks there. And here, it's just basically one line that would take you to the water. Most farmers in the South are still really relying on horse and buggy and boats to take their products somewhere else. Or they're just simply walking. Transportation has not evolved yet. The North is relying more heavily on the railroads, but still, it's difficult. Now, the big name to know is that by 1860, the famous railroad tycoon in America was Cornelius Vanderbilt. Is he a robber baron, a bad guy, one focused on profit? Perhaps. Is he, someone who's also focused on philanthropy or charitable efforts trying to make America better? Also possibly true. I tend to think that he's more on the robber baron side, that he didn't treat his employees the best, but he also did make charitable contributions. He raised his family right. They're the ones, in fact, who go on to make numerous charitable donations and build schools and such. So there is reason to kind of think he might be both. But of course, I'm trying to get you guys to pick one side or the other for a writing assignment next week. Now, Vanderbilt is famous because he goes ahead and he builds this railroad track between Chicago and New York, uniting the country, making it easier for people to travel, to trade, to ship goods. Now, Vanderbilt, though, there's a picture of Vanderbilt right there, in fact. But before I get to, that's actually Jay Gould, sorry. This man I previously saw, this guy in the picture, this man right here, this is Vanderbilt. This guy who came up before, that's Jay Gould. So I want to talk just a minute more about Vanderbilt before I get into Jay Gould. And basically what you're looking at in this kind of political cartoon, and we're going to be looking a lot more at political cartoons in upcoming chapters because they're interesting, the cartoonist has a perspective, they're trying to get a message across. In this one, you have to understand that Jay Gould is getting on in his years as we get into the Gilded Age. In fact, he dies early on into the Gilded Age because, like I said, he was already pretty old at that point. He had built this huge railroad industry. He had laid miles of track. You can see all the different miles of track that were being laid over the years towards the time that the Gilded Age began. And he attempted to basically, take over more land throughout the East Coast, and it's going to be just a constant battle with some of his rivals. This man is by the name of Field, and this man is by the name of Jay Gould, and the three of them are going to basically duking it out to see who can build railroad tracks and who can basically, get control of the land. And honestly, part of the reason why Vanderbilt and Gould are considered perhaps robber barons is because they used unethical means to try to get this land. They would intimidate people, they would lie, they would steal, they would, just do whatever it took to make sure that they would be able to buy this land or get a land grant from the government. They had a lot of friends in Congress, and so they would ensure that, their company was given the contract to build these railroad tracks, because it's not like you can have more than one tracks in the same area. That's not possible. You're still getting permission to do so by the government, but you still have to buy up the land. It was an expensive process. And honestly, it was more profitable in some cases just to get the land from the government, perhaps free or at a reduced rate, than buying it outright. And it was more profitable than just to own the land than it was perhaps to even operate the railroad at the time you built the tracks, paid the employees, and you perhaps didn't actually have all that much commerce or travel. But it was them constantly kind of duking it out. And the thing that I like about this political cartoon in particular is it really shows, their control over the railroads, and it almost portrays them as like little trains as he's kind of riding the tracks, riding the trains as he's moving forward, as if he's water skiing and such, and these men are trying to grab hold of the tracks. I also like this cartoon because it really shows you the modern chaos that was happening in the 1860s, 1870s with these railroad companies, how there were definitely just all these tracks laid across the country, yet you couldn't necessarily get from one place to another efficiently. You had to still disembark from one track to the next. So there is some debate perhaps about whether Vanderbilt is, a robber baron or not, but everyone pretty much agrees that Gould is a robber baron. Like, I didn't have you read his background. You had to read the background on Morgan and Carnegie and Vanderbilt, and who's the last one? Rockefeller. And it's because many people kind of think that there's evidence in both accounts to show these men as robber barons or as heroes, as captains of industry. Gould, I didn't include him. He's the straight up ghoul. Gould is a ghoul. He is a terrible robber baron. He was considered the most despised man in America during the 1870s. He has a lot of friends in Congress, and so he persuades them, like I said, to tell him, what the upcoming deals are, and it would be straight up bribes. Like, he would bribe members of Ulysses Grant's cabinet so he could find out like what the president's plans were, whether the president wanted to build a new train track there. He would get the cabinet members drunk, he would take them out to dinner, he would pay for their kids' education, whatever it took, so that he was the one who would get the contract for his company, so then he could eventually become the #1 railroad tycoon, especially after Vanderbilt's death. And Gould and his company are able to lay down 15,000 tracks throughout the country for just his company. And so he is the head honcho during this time period. Now, in a way, it's good because he helps expand railroad tracks across the nation. He makes it easier for people to travel, to trade, to send goods. He standardizes railroad gauges. But he does it in such corrupt means. And he's also considered such a despicable man because of his actions on the stock market. We know that he purposely tried to corner the gold market, which eventually leads to an economic panic and recession, yet somehow the man escaped charges every time. He always pinned it on somebody else and had fantastic lawyers. So he was definitely despised. And if you remember way back when I talked about President Grant, in earlier chapters, I talked about how, his cabinet was, pretty shady. This is who that cabinet members were doing shady business deals with. They were doing them with Jay Gould. And so, the past kind of comes back yet again. And there's just a picture, as I was saying before, of Gould. The previous one was Vanderbilt. And you don't have to write anything down on this slide. You really don't have to worry about it too much. I just really want to show you more of the images is what I'm interested in. So you can see this first transcontinental railroad, right? Built in 1869. They finished it here at Promontory Point in Utah. You can see kind of the dip where they finished it between the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. The Central Pacific was Jay Gould's company, okay? So they were the ones who laid down more track. And remember, it's because they got to go through kind of flatter land. And I want to show you this next picture, which just shows you, yes, the Eastern railroads were all linked between the trunk lines. Yes, but that's not what I'm really concerned about. It's this one. Look at this one. And this one, guys, is taken. This is 1890. So by 1890, we finally have filled in the gaps. You can finally take the train up to Maine, not quite to the top up to Canada. You can finally take the train throughout Florida. And this is when we still see more Western development. And we can finally travel between North and South. So this is really and truly when we're really seeing full expansion, sending of goods, people back and forth. And so the Second Industrial Revolution is really about the train. Once we get into the 1900s, in that latter portion of the Second Industrial Revolution, of the Gilded Age, that's when we see more of the advances in the car and the airplane. And of course, as we're building all these trains, it means we need oil for the trains, we need iron, we need steel, we need coal. And so it's meaning more resources. So it's kind of this circular effect where, sorry about that, my computer died for a second. I forgot that I didn't charge it. But basically, yeah, you don't have to worry about writing down all this stuff on the slide. Just focus on the fact that by 1890, we have these trains that are created across the country. And these railroads, as they're being built, of course, it means that you need more oil and coal and iron and steel to create these tracks. And so it's kind of this circular effect, like I was saying, where, one invention or one change impacts another, leading us into just a greater industrial revolution. Almost done with our lecture for today, but not quite there yet. So you might be sitting there wondering, how come the U.S. government didn't step in and force Cornelius Vanderbilt to pay his employees more? How come the U.S. government didn't stop Jay Gould from being such a ghoul, from being such a robber baron and like mistreating employees and like ripping people off and using intimidation and cheating and scamming. Like, why aren't they doing anything about this? Okay, a couple of reasons. One reason the government isn't doing anything is because honestly, the government was hugely corrupt at this time. We'll talk about that kind of at the end of this chapter, but there's something called the political machine. And basically, just like a toaster is a machine and its job is to make toast, the political machine's job was to get their candidate elected for office, whether they were Democrat or Republican, and control things and be corrupt. And a lot of people were getting bribed and taking bribes and hugely immoral, and that's part of it. But the other reason why the government is not getting involved is because of our economic system. Now, remember, when we talk about economics, that's how we make money. And in America, we are a capitalist system. You might be thinking to yourself, well, I thought we were a democracy. Democracy is the kind of government you have. So we are a democracy, meaning we are a country where the people get to make the laws. Okay, the people are in charge. They elect their leaders. But in terms of how we make money, we are a capitalist economic system. And so we are all about private property and profit, meaning that if you ever gone to somebody's house and maybe you were a little Girl Scout or Boy Scout and you were going to sell them, popcorn or cookies, they might have one of those signs which say no solicitors, private property. They can do that and they can tell you, get the heck out of here. This is my private property. We're all about that in America. We're all about the ability to open your own business as well. So if you want to open that lemonade stand and hey, this weekend you decide you're going to have one in your driveway, you can do it, technically. The government might force you in this modern day to fill out some forms and to get a permit, but yes, you can open up that business. And capitalists believe that the government should not get involved in your business. They should let you be, because if they let you be, you can make the best choices for the consumers and for your business, and you can make the most profit. And this concept of the government leaving you alone comes from the French. And the French word for it is laissez-faire, which basically means in French, let it be, leave it alone. It's the idea that the government should be lazy. They should be uninvolved in your business. And the man at the bottom of the screen, that's Adam Smith. In the 1700s, he wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. And he said that a country is more likely to be wealthy and its people are more likely to be wealthy if you leave the market alone, if you let the people be free. And when I say market, think about it in terms of a farmer's market. If you go to that farmer's market and you're going to sell your lemonade, people are only going to buy it at that market if it is priced well and if it tastes good, okay? If your lemonade tastes terrible and it's expensive, nobody's going to buy that stuff. And so Smith said, just leave the market free. Let the people do what they want. It shouldn't be that the government is telling you how much you have to charge per cup of lemonade. It shouldn't be that the government's telling the consumers they have to purchase so many cups of lemonade. Things will work out on its own. It's like there's an invisible hand or invisible being guiding someone to buy certain products. And businesses that prosper, that are meant to prosper, will do so because they have good products that people need, that they're interested in, and they're priced right. And so in this economic system, of capitalism, that's what Americans have adopted. And some hardcore capitalists or Americans really and truly believe that our country functions best when the government is not involved at all, meaning the government should not tell employers how to run their businesses, what the working conditions should be like, how much they should pay their employees. And then ultimately, that way the company can have more profit. If you're selling your lemonade in your glass for $1 a day, okay, well, how much does it actually cost to buy the materials for the lemonade? And how much do you have to pay your employees? You need to make sure that you're charging more than the cost of the materials plus the cost for the employees so that you make a profit. If you're charging $1 a day, that will only work if you've priced it appropriately based off of how much quantity you're giving the customers and your initial costs. Now, if the government starts coming in and they start telling you, well, you have to pay your employees, $2, or $3 or $4 or $5 or whatever it is, and they start saying you have to pay them more and more and more, you might say, okay, but I might have to charge more per glass for lemonade now because I need to make a bigger profit for each glass so that I can make the money to pay my employees more. Well, The problem with that is if you charge too high a prices, nobody's going to want to buy that lemonade, are they? So it's a difficult balance. On the downside, though, if the government doesn't get involved and if the government doesn't tell an employer, what the working conditions should be like or how much to pay employees, then you get robber barons. So yet again, it's a difficult balance. Remember, at this point in history, many Americans are working for $1 a day or less in a factory for a 12-hour shift. We're going to see over time as we go through the Gilded Age that some people might make $2 a day, and eventually by the end of the Gilded Age, Henry Ford will come out with this startling revelation where he's going to offer like $5 a day. But many Americans are only making like $300 to $500 a year, guys. So it's definitely rough. And if the government had said you have to pay them more, that would have been great. But yet again, there was a lot of opposition against this, where people just said, no, that's against capitalism. So it didn't happen. And unfortunately, there were these robber barons who took advantage of the situation. Last slide. And which brings us to Andrew Carnegie. Now, I've posted a video clip about him. And honestly, I've watched the video clip. I've taught this for years, and I still can never remember how to say this man's name. If it's Andrew Carnegie or Andrew Carnegie, I don't know. I just always mess it up. But you're going to watch the video clip about him to learn a little bit more about him. But he was a Scotch-Irish immigrant. And, hello? I'm sorry, guys. I think this is literally like the worst video I've ever made. In the middle of this video so far, my husband has called, and then somebody came to my door to have a meeting, and then I forgot to charge my computer and it died. So I'm just like, wow, I keep forgetting where I'm at. So I'm sorry, guys. But last slide to talk about today is Andrew Carnegie. And Carnegie, however the guy's name is, you're going to watch the video clip, remote learners, and learn a little bit more about him. But he was Scotch-Irish immigrant. He comes to America when he's 12. He works several different jobs. He ends up working kind of translating Morse code. He kind of has some ears for it. He ends up working at a railroad company, and he realizes as he kind of works as kind of a mentee for one of the superintendents of the railroad that more and more railroad companies are going to be built. And he decides, instead of going into railroads himself, that he wants to go into steel. He goes into England and he learns about the Bessemer process, about how you take iron, you take out the impurities, you create steel. And he decides we're going to need steel in America if they're going to be building all these railroads. So he opens up this steel corporation. And by 1901, U.S. Steel is the largest corporation in the world. And he is incredibly successful because, honestly, he is a bit of a robber baron. He's brutal. He's ruthless. He is willing to undercut the competition. He doesn't care about, basically paying his employees next to nothing in unsafe conditions for long hours. He is willing to, at the same point, fire anyone who basically crosses him or challenges him or says they want better conditions, which is why eventually his employees go on strike at Homestead. And we'll talk more about that strike later in the chapter. He does give huge bonuses to people who do work well, but you really have to be like someone who's proven yourself or upper management. It's not like the average Joe who's getting these bonus money. And he is a real stickler for spending money. Like, oh, yep, your lunch break, it was 29 and a half minutes. You're going to try to go to, 30 minutes. Okay, you got your 30. You better not be a second late or I'm going to dock your pay. He's one of those guys who he watches, how much water you drink and how many napkins you use and how many squares of toilet paper. He's really trying to save a buck. He's constantly trying to improve kind of how they create the steel so that it's faster and so that it's cheaper, so that he doesn't have to spend as much money. But he does have a lot of philanthropic efforts as well as far as donating his money. And so I want you to watch that video clip about him. And you're going to be reading the primary source documents about him as well. And as you're reading the primary source documents about him, I want you to be thinking about, basically what is the subject of the document and, ultimately what was the occasion, what was the audience, what was the purpose of the document, and, was there any bias included in the document? Were they trying to persuade you? You need to be thinking about all that stuff as you're analyzing the document, as you're answering the questions. You're going to be answering 2 questions for each document, 10 total, the one in bold, plus another question for each document. And I did kind of post that SOAPs analysis on the day 3 lesson plan here, but you don't really have to do anything about it. Just kind of be thinking about it as you analyze those primary sources. And that's it for today, guys. Make sure you get that Venn diagram done as well. Have a great day. Later.